Spotify's been making headlines lately, and not always for the best reasons. A bunch of artists are yanking their music from the platform, frustrated by how little they're getting paid per stream. This has kicked off some heated debates about whether Spotify's business model is actually fair to musicians. Meanwhile, Spotify is doubling down on podcasts, investing big money, and shifting its focus away from music. All of this has people wondering, is Spotify helping artists, or just changing the game to suit itself? Daniel Ek's story is pretty wild. As a teenager, he was already hustling, building websites, and charging more with every new client. By his early 20s, he'd sold a business for a cool $1 million, but instead of kicking back, he found himself restless and craving something bigger. That drive led him to dream up Spotify, aiming to shake up the music industry and give artists a new way to earn. It's a classic case of early success fueling an even bigger ambition. Back in the early 2000s, the music industry faced a massive shakeup thanks to Napster and other file-sharing platforms. Suddenly, millions of people could download songs for free, and record sales started to nosedive. This wasn't just a minor hiccup, it was a full-blown crisis for artists and record labels, who saw their revenue streams dry up almost overnight. The old business model just couldn't keep up with the new technology, so everyone started scrambling for a way to fix the problem. That search for solutions set the stage for the rise of legal streaming services like Spotify. Daniel Ek had a big idea: make all the world's music available instantly, legally, and funded by ads. He figured this would be a win-win. Listeners get easy access, artists and labels get paid, and piracy takes a hit. But the record labels weren't buying it. As soon as they heard the word free, they got nervous, worried that ad revenue wouldn't cover their costs. So, from the very beginning, Spotify had to convince some pretty powerful skeptics that streaming could actually work for everyone involved. Here's a wild twist. When Spotify was just getting started, the team actually downloaded thousands of songs illegally to build their prototype. It sounds counterintuitive, but they faced a classic chicken and egg problem. How do you show record labels a working music platform if you don't have any music to demo? So they filled their app with pirated tracks just to prove the concept. It was risky, but without this move, they couldn't convince the industry their idea was worth backing. Sometimes, breaking the rules is what gets innovation off the ground. After months of late nights and relentless coding, the Spotify team finally rolled out their first prototype. Early testers were blown away by how quickly songs started playing. No more waiting around for downloads. The app also featured smart playlists and organized artist pages, making it super easy to discover and manage music. This smooth experience set Spotify apart from other platforms, showing just how powerful a well-designed streaming service could be. It was clear from the start that Spotify was onto something big. When Spotify first tried to strike deals with the major record labels, Sony, Warner, and Universal, things got tense. The labels weren't sold on Spotify's idea of free music funded by ads, and they wanted guaranteed payments every time someone played a song. For Spotify, this was risky, since ad revenue wasn't always predictable. The label's skepticism made negotiations drag on, and Spotify had to scramble to find a compromise that would keep both sides happy. Eventually, they agreed to add a paid subscription option and give the labels a big chunk of the revenue, but it was clear from the start that the music business wasn't going to make things easy. So here's where things got interesting. Spotify's original plan was all about free music funded by ads, but the record labels weren't having it. At the 11th hour, they struck a deal. Spotify would add a paid subscription option, and the labels would get about 70% of all revenue, plus a chunk of Spotify stock. That left Spotify with just 30% to cover everything else, making profitability a real challenge. This compromise was the only way to get the music industry on board, but it set the stage for years of financial tension. So, Spotify officially hit the scene in 2008, after a frantic scramble to secure legal music rights and scrub out all those pirated tracks from its early prototype. With deals in place for most of Europe, it looked like the company had finally dodged the biggest hurdles. But the reality was, the music industry wasn't ready to roll out the red carpet just yet. Record labels still held a ton of power, and artists had their own complaints about streaming payouts. Basically, launching was just the beginning. Spotify's real battles were only getting started. Record labels have always held a lot of power over Spotify, and they weren't shy about using it. To keep their music licenses, Spotify had to make the free version less appealing, think fewer features and more restrictions, so users would be nudged toward paid subscriptions. On top of that, labels kept pushing for a bigger slice of Spotify's revenue, especially whenever the company raised new funds or grew its user base. This constant tug-of-war meant Spotify had to balance keeping listeners happy with satisfying the demands of the music industry. It's a classic case of business negotiation, where every side wants a bigger piece of the pie. A bunch of big-name artists, like Metallica and Taylor Swift, have called out Spotify for paying musicians too little. Some even pulled their songs from the platform in protest, hoping to make a statement. But here's the twist. Most of them ended up coming back. Why? Because streaming royalties, even if small, are better than nothing. And let's face it, streaming isn't going anywhere. So, while the debate over fair payouts continues, artists realize it's tough to ignore the world's biggest music platform. Let's break it down. While Spotify changed how we listen to music, the biggest winners weren't the artists, but the record labels. These labels actually owned shares in Spotify, so as the platform grew, their profits did too. Meanwhile, artists faced shrinking sales and a new headache: fake streams. These artificial plays meant less money ended up in musicians' pockets, even as their songs racked up numbers. So, despite all the innovation, the economics of streaming left many artists feeling shortchanged. Even though a lot of artists were unhappy with Spotify, the platform kept attracting more and more users. One big reason? Spotify teamed up with Facebook, making it super easy for people to share music and playlists with their friends. They also struck deals with broadband providers, bundling Spotify trials with internet subscriptions, which got the app in front of tons of new listeners. And let's not forget the invite-only launch strategy. By making Spotify feel exclusive, they created buzz and demand, even though invites were actually pretty easy to get. All these moves helped Spotify grow fast, turning it into a household name despite ongoing controversy. So, by 2011, Spotify had managed to snag 1 million paying subscribers, a pretty impressive milestone for any startup. But here's the catch. Even with all those users, Spotify still wasn't making a profit. This sparked a lot of questions about whether their business model could actually work in the long run. After all, having lots of customers is great, but if the money coming in doesn't cover the costs, you've got a problem. Investors and industry insiders started wondering if Spotify could ever turn things around, or if streaming was just too expensive to sustain. When the streaming wars kicked off, it wasn't just Spotify in the game anymore. Suddenly, tech giants like Apple, Google, Amazon, and YouTube were rolling out their own music platforms, and even Tidal jumped in with artist-backed exclusives. This surge of new services meant listeners had more choices than ever, but it also put serious pressure on Spotify to stand out. With everyone offering basically the same music, the real challenge became finding ways to keep users loyal and attract new ones. Competition was fierce, and the battle for music listeners was just getting started. Spotify's free tier was a clever move. It got millions of people hooked on streaming music without paying a dime. But here's the catch. If the big record labels ever decided to pull their music, Spotify would be in serious trouble. So, the company started looking for ways to stand out, like investing in exclusive content and personalized playlists. These features gave Spotify more control and helped it build a loyal user base, making it less dependent on the whims of the music industry giants. In the end, it wasn't just about offering free music, it was about creating something that couldn't easily be taken away. So, how did Spotify try to stand out in the crowded streaming world? They went all in on podcasts. Instead of just playing music, Spotify started investing billions of dollars to snag exclusive podcast deals and even bought up platforms like Anchor. The idea was simple: own more content, attract new listeners, and pay less to record labels. By shifting focus to podcasts, Spotify hoped to boost profits and become more than just a music app, turning itself into a one-stop audio shop. Spotify's secret sauce? Personalization. Instead of just letting you search for your favorite songs, Spotify uses machine learning to figure out what you might like next. That's how features like Discover Weekly and Release Radar came about. These playlists are tailored just for you, based on your listening habits. It's not just about convenience. It keeps users coming back for fresh music and helps Spotify stand out in a crowded streaming market. By recommending tracks you didn't even know you wanted, Spotify turns passive listening into an ongoing discovery experience. Here's where things get interesting. Spotify doesn't just stream music, it actually shapes what you hear. By controlling playlists and recommendations, Spotify can push certain tracks to the top, especially those that cost them less to license or bring in more revenue. This means your favorite playlist might be packed with songs that aren't necessarily the most popular, but are the most profitable for Spotify. It's a smart business move, but it also raises questions about fairness and how much power Spotify has over the music industry. In the end, what you listen to isn't just about your taste. It's also about Spotify's bottom line. So here's where things get a bit weird. Spotify was caught adding so-called fake artists to its playlists, basically tracks from royalty-free music libraries, not actual musicians with fan followings. Why? It's all about saving money. Spotify pays less for these tracks than for songs from big-name artists. This move sparked outrage among musicians who felt their chances of getting playlisted and paid were being squeezed. It also raised questions about transparency, since listeners often had no clue these artists weren't real people, just names created to fill playlists and cut costs. So, here's where things get interesting. As Spotify looks for ways to save money and stay ahead, some folks are wondering if the company will start mixing in AI-generated music. Imagine playlists filled with songs made by algorithms instead of real musicians. That could seriously shake up the industry. On one hand, it might help Spotify cut costs and increase profits, but on the other, it raises big questions about what happens to actual artists. If AI music takes off, could it push real musicians out of the spotlight? It's a debate that's just getting started, and the outcome could change how we experience music for years to come. Let's break it down. When more than a third of all streams on Spotify are driven by the platform's own recommendations, Spotify isn't just a music player. It's a tastemaker. This means the algorithms behind those playlists and suggestions can make or break an artist's career. If Spotify decides to push a song, it can rocket up the charts. If it doesn't, even talented musicians might struggle to get noticed. So, the power has shifted from record labels to the tech platform itself, and that's a pretty big deal for anyone trying to make it in the music business. Spotify isn't just a music library. It's more like a gatekeeper for what you hear. Thanks to its powerful recommendation algorithms and curated playlists, Spotify can boost the popularity of certain artists or quietly reduce the reach of others. For example, when artists have been involved in controversies or their songs contain hate speech, Spotify has been known to limit their exposure, sometimes even removing them from playlists altogether. This means Spotify isn't just distributing music, it's actively shaping the music landscape, deciding who gets the spotlight and who fades into the background. So, when you hit play, you're not just listening to what's trending, you're hearing what Spotify wants you to hear. Spotify isn't just a place to stream music anymore, it's become a full-on marketplace. Now listeners pay for subscriptions to access their favorite tracks, while artists and labels shell out cash to promote their music and land spots on popular playlists. This shift means Spotify is making money from both sides of the equation, not just from users, but also from the people creating the music. It's a big change from the old days when Spotify was simply a distributor, and it gives the company a lot more control over who gets heard and how much exposure artists receive. Here's where things get interesting. Record labels are now paying Spotify to get their songs featured on popular playlists and to boost their rankings. That means the music you hear isn't just about what's trending, it's also about who's willing to pay for exposure. On top of that, artists can use Spotify to promote their merchandise and concert tickets directly to listeners. So, Spotify isn't just a streaming service anymore. It's become a marketplace where both labels and artists compete for your attention and your wallet. Daniel Ek, the founder of Spotify, was once crowned the most powerful person in the music industry. But with great power comes great controversy. Spotify's influence over what gets heard and who gets paid has sparked debates among artists, record labels, and listeners alike. From playlist algorithms that can make or break careers to disputes over royalties, The platform's dominance has reshaped the music business, but not always in ways everyone agrees with. So, even as Spotify sits at the top, it's constantly navigating a landscape full of challenges and pushback. When Spotify dropped $100 million on the Joe Rogan podcast, it wasn't just a headline. It kicked off a storm of controversy. Artists were frustrated, seeing Rogan's massive payout while their own streaming earnings barely added up to pocket change. Listeners chimed in too, debating whether Spotify should censor certain episodes or let them run free. The whole situation highlighted deeper questions about who gets paid, who gets heard, and how platforms like Spotify shape the conversation. In the end, it's not just about podcasts or music. It's about the economics of attention and influence in the streaming era. Spotify has found itself in a tricky spot when it comes to podcast content. On one hand, the platform has removed certain episodes, sparking accusations of censorship. On the other, it's faced backlash for leaving up controversial material, which some say should have been taken down. This balancing act hasn't gone unnoticed. Several artists have responded by pulling their music from Spotify altogether. It's a classic case of trying to please everyone and ending up with nobody happy, showing just how complicated content moderation can get in the digital age. Let's be real. Spotify didn't just change the playlist, it rewrote the rules of the music game. Gone are the days of buying CDs or downloading MP3s. Now, streaming is king, and Spotify sits at the throne. This shift has made music more accessible than ever, turning listening into an on-demand experience. For the industry, streaming has become the biggest moneymaker, outpacing all those old-school formats. So, despite all the controversy and pushback, Spotify's impact on how we consume music is undeniable. Spotify's impact on the music industry is pretty controversial. On one hand, it helped curb rampant piracy by making music easy and legal to access, which was a huge win for record labels and listeners. But for artists, the story isn't so rosy. Many claim they're paid peanuts for streams, and that Spotify's algorithms and playlists give the company outsized control over who gets heard. So while streaming might have rescued the industry from the chaos of illegal downloads, it's also sparked debates about fairness and power in the hands of one tech giant. Spotify's ambition to dominate the podcast world isn't exactly new. In fact, other tech companies have tried to build online audio hubs before. Remember Odeo, which eventually became Twitter? This move highlights how streaming platforms are always looking for ways to stand out and capture more of our attention. By investing billions in podcasting and making it easier for creators to earn money, Spotify is betting big that audio content will keep growing. It's all part of the bigger trend. The internet keeps reshaping how we discover, share, and profit from sound.